Pete, don't you find it intriguing that Aristotle elected to remain in Plato's proverbial cave?
No, it's obvious. Plato's a stupid name anyway.
Well, I would like a meta-analysis on this affirmation.
Welcome all are welcome on Debatology. I'm Peter Barrett and I've been in debating for more than 10 years as a competitor and a trainer. And on this channel, we figure out ways to improve conversations and come to better decisions. One of the primary concerns of debaters is to persuade, whether it is their counterparts or their audience. When we open our mouths, we want to be right and convince the other side. The discipline that is most closely associated with this ability is rhetorics, an ancient art form that can be traced back more than 4,000 years, but that is best known via the work of a few key ancient Greek and Roman thinkers, such as Aristotle or Cicero. Frankly, it's pretty hard to believe that something as complex as human psychology and cognition that we study today using fMRIs and other intricate methods were already important areas of interest more than 2,500 years ago. Of course, they didn't have the technology we have today, but they still described rhetorical concepts that contribute to how we teach the subject to this day. So in this episode, I'm gonna try to go back on Aristotle's intuitions and put it in contrast with the new knowledge on persuasion. This is gonna be a big one, so hang in there. Do you think that Aristotle is going to hold up to modern science? Well, we're about to find out. So let's get to it. Imagine that you're an ancient Athenian attending a debate at the Agora. You're suddenly called to stand up and address your peers to persuade them. You adjust your nicely decorated chiton to ensure that you are properly draped and presentable. You take a deep breath and what? What do you say? I mean, everyone's looking at you, waiting for your speech, but how do you know what you will say has an impact on your audience? Before the dawn of modern scientific methods, these situations were literally all Aristotle had to refer to both deduce rhetorical techniques and test them. Thanks to this democratic experience, he wrote multiple books on rhetorics and made many recommendations. But I'm going to focus on the main principles that are still used today as the philosopher's legacy on the topic. I'm, of course, talking about the famous triad: ethos, pathos, logos. To define them simply, I would just say that logos refers to reasoning or logic, ethos is the credibility of the orator, and pathos means emotions. Now, I don't want you to get bogged down in the details of Aristotle's thinking, so here's a list of effective methods prescribed by our Greek philosopher more than 2,000 years ago that have actually been confirmed by recent scientific studies. As always, you can find all my sources in the description. Are you ready? Here we go. Logic isn't sufficient to persuade. Subcomponents of the ethos, such as goodwill, can help you build trust. Wisdom and excellence can help you to persuade. Using strong negative emotions can be persuasive, specifically when you use fear, anger, or indignation. Storytelling is effective. Rhetorical devices, such as amplification, slogans, analogies, metaphors, are all conducive to persuasion. And finally, adapting to your audience, especially its age and situation, when it comes to our choice of arguments, works. All of these tips are valid and still relevant. And if I had picked Cicero instead of Aristotle for this video, I'd be able to make similar observations, especially when it comes to the surprising similarity between the classical Cicero speech structure and the one used today by tech startups pitching investors in Silicon Valley. It's really uncanny, but definitely worth another video. So don't forget to like and subscribe for more debate science. Of course, we would be mistaken to stop here. Some validated intuitions are one thing, but Aristotle wasn't a perfect predictor of modern scientific discovery, to say the least. I mean, we're talking about a man who thought that life could spontaneously generate out of rotting corpses, which isn't just wrong, it's creepy even to think of how he came up with that. So putting creepy crawlers aside, modern persuasion theory is filled with counterintuitive concepts that force us to be humble when it comes to rhetorics, but also when it comes to our own free will. So let's start here. The assumption of free will. This assumption permeates Aristotle's work. Yet, are we really capable of complete freedom of belief and action? As you hear this, you may be worried that I'm becoming conspiratorial, that someone is imposing you your belief and action. But in reality, you are the conspiracy theorist. Yes, let me explain. So, in our brain, we have a cognitive function that is commonly called the left hemisphere interpreter. This is our conspiratorial brain. This part of the brain proposes interpretations without any limits to explain our internal states, those of others, and the world around us. You can think of it like a sense-making machine. Your brain is looking for a reason to make sense of a behavior or reaction in you or in others. But in reality, it has very limited access to the real explanations, and yet it will make up reasons even if it doesn't know. It is both a very practical cognitive function because it allows us to imagine explanatory theories based on probabilities that we infer from experiences, memories, emotional reactions, and our senses. But it also is a perverse tool because it leaves us believing that we know why we believe something, why we act in a certain way, when in reality, we don't have access to the real reasons of our convictions and actions. You can think of smokers or other addicts. You can straight away understand this principle. A smoker thinks that they can stop when they can't stop. They think that they want something when they want something else. This function of our brain makes our reasoning illusory. So, how can you expect an orator to be able to access their audience's reasoning if they don't have access to their own reason? Knowing this about a person's brain gives you a big advantage. Because if we know that our interlocutor has only very limited access to the reasons that makes them act, then going through logical routes of reasoning, well, it probably will not be convinced them. Alternatively, we can find other parts of the brain where the judgment of an idea or action is lodged. That is where the real reasons for belief and action lies. It so happens that the regions of the brain associated with motivation and belief are also associated with other cognitive functions, such as disgust or touch or spatial orientation through the senses. These discoveries are solid and apply beyond any specific cultural context. If you're still here, it's time to imagine a practical application for these discoveries. For example, if you have a choice between making a litanic list of arguments, hoping to crush your interlocutor under the weight of the evidence, or telling them a personal story demonstrating of your satisfaction or success, you know that the second one will be more persuasive. There are many other stratagems that could be employed, but you're starting to see all the subtlety of the act of persuasion, as it apparently does not need to be directed at the interlocutor, contrary to what our intuition might indicate. What is even more impressive is the ability of our well-constructed message to have an effect without a person realizing it. Indeed, changes in behavior can be observed even though an individual maintains that they have not been persuaded. We could both find this very frustrating and a bit amusing, but know that it also is your case. Good dose of humility is therefore necessary in the face of the limits of our intuition, whether we are in the audience or on stage. Another significant component of persuasion that comes from discoveries in social cognition is a form of broadening of the concept of Aristotle's ethos. The emotional, affective, and behavioral states and the opinions of others, all of that informs our own state. As with the well-known mechanism of mirror neurons, we modify our behavior and convictions based on what other people think and do. So, where Aristotle stopped the question of credibility at the speaker themselves, these studies demonstrate that a restriction is not justified. The influence of others and the group are very strong levers of persuasion. I'm sorry, but being an independently minded person is literally impossible. In a few minutes, you may have realized what subtleties and knowledge these last decades have brought us about persuasion. But even these modern discoveries come with a warning. In the face of the burgeoning field of neuroscience, it is important to preserve perspective and even suggest a return to the sources. For almost a decade, science has been going through a significant methodological crisis, and it particularly affects social and medical sciences. It's called the reproducibility crisis. Although we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one, it's important to put some recent advances in cognitive sciences into perspective, because a large number of studies don't seem to be reproducible. Researchers are passionate and diligent individuals who are not afraid to point out the limitations and errors in the methods they use, and to propose improvement strategies to continue producing high-quality, actionable knowledge for you and me. However, the limits of persuasion science don't stop here. There are three major problems when it comes to universally applying these science-based recommendations. 1. Most scientific studies have to be led in controlled environments to make sure we're evaluating the right variable. But in the real world, we're constantly faced with multiple compounding variables that all interact with each other. This makes it hard to determine which recommendation to apply out in the wild. 2. Scientific studies give us an average of impact. Even in controlled environments, the statistical significance of studies only show the average benefit of using a specific technique, which does not ensure a direct benefit in a given specific situation. 3. Even if something works, does that mean we should do it? If lying and manipulating works to persuade, does that mean we should do it? Ethical concerns aren't co-evaluated alongside persuasive strategies, which makes it hard for us to determine which method to use in a given setting. Fortunately, several researchers propose avenues on the last question, including Jonathan Haidt and Jim Everett, whom I encourage you to read. Regarding the study of persuasion in a real world, fortunately, this is increasingly being done on diverse populations and large samples, but often at the expense of speech, as writing is way easier to control for scientific experiments. Finally, how should I adapt my message to my audience? There is much to learn from intercultural communication models or from the science of emotions, particularly the works of Lisa Feldman Barrett and Susan David. But ultimately, one of the best pieces of advice any speaker can give you is to practice. Practice, practice, practice. Perhaps this is where the artistic dimension of rhetoric is best perceived, as this discipline is performative. Even though it must be studied, understood, and mastered by science, there is no other way to embody all of its subtleties than to practice it again and again, and then reap all the benefits. So, whether your audience is booing you, being careless, or intrigued, go on stage and address them the best way you can, and then learn from observing others, questioning your audience after your speech. In this way, you can refine your model, and informed by what the cognitive science tell you, you will become a better debater. If you're a fan of classical rhetoric, I hope that you found some interesting insights in this video. And if you don't know anything about it, I do encourage you to read some of the classical literature. It's always interesting to read the philosophy alongside the science to gain some perspective on a given topic. If you want to read more about rhetorics, I encourage you to pick up a new book by a fellow debater and debate coach called Bo Seo. His book, Good Arguments, is going to become a classic. You know that I try very hard to source everything I tell you on this show. So please, look at my sources below. The debate is open in the comments. Please contribute in good faith and good spirit. If you think that the topics covered in these videos are important, you should know that I work with organizations all over the world to build up behavioral skills, facilitate more constructive conversations, improve critical thinking, and ethical conduct. There is more information on that on my personal website,
phsbear.com, so feel free to check it out. And I'll see you next time on Debatology.